again, welcome to the supply chain of tomorrow in China today. I am Chris Leggett. I'm the program manager here at the Central Florida International Trade Office. I'm also the vice chair for trade policy at the Central North Florida District Export Council. We help to connect businesses to the opportunities in the global marketplace, and we do that through a variety of different ways, one of which is on one-on-one counseling with companies that are interested in learning more about importing and exporting. We also offer events like these, where we'll talk about particular topics or markets that are going to be of interest to Orlando area businesses. We'll also go out and talk to organizations about international trade, why it's going to be a great tool for businesses that are looking to grow and better manage risk. Also, we recently developed an international trade guide, which is on BizLink Orange. Some of you may have seen the cards up front for that, and I would encourage you to take one, use the QR code, and visit the bizlinkorange.com website. We're able to do this thanks to the generous support from Orange County in particular. Carol's going to be joining us shortly from Orange County, as well as Shally Wong online. The City of Orlando and Seminole County are two of our other sponsors. So our objectives today are to help your company optimize your supply chain. And given that customers are aware of supply chain issues and that China is such a dynamic market, you need every potential advantage in China in order to help you maintain a competitive edge both there and here. And we're very fortunate to have 5 great speakers to talk about this today. First up, we will be hearing from Art Dicker, who is a director and senior counsel at R&P China Lawyers with over 14 years experience in China. Prior to R&P, he was Asia Pacific General Counsel at NASDAQ listed Cadence Design Systems. Art focuses on helping Western technology and consumer companies structure their investments and operations in China. After Art, we'll hear from Kim Kirkendall, who has over 30 years experience in international business. She began her career by moving to China in 1986, ran factories and developed supply chains throughout Asia. She's currently the president of International Resource Development, Inc., where she consults with companies to develop, expand, or improve their operations in Asia. Then we're very fortunate to have Orlando's own Maryann Kilgallon talk to us a bit about the experience of a local business in managing their supply chain. Maryann is the founder and CEO of Lotus Technologies. She's known as the startup evangelist, is a lifelong serial entrepreneur with vast experience in startups. She's made it her mission to excel and help others along the way to go for it when it comes to pursuing your goals. Maryann has been recognized on Forbes Next 1000, the UPS Ignite Entrepreneurs, and with the Technology Innovator Award Best Child Personal Safety Solution 2021, which is probably about the longest name for an award out there. And she's also been published in the book Latinas 100. With over 16 years experience in building restaurants, she transitioned to the technology sector when she saw a need for a solution to help keep families safe and connected. She is the creator of the Palm safety platform that protects loved ones. She considers herself a techie student as she navigates a team of exceptional individuals who share her vision for the mission. Then we're going to have 2 more experts join us as part of the panel discussion when we'll be able to take questions from the audience. David Alexander joins us with over 20 years experience in executive leadership in mergers and acquisitions, operations, and supply chain management. He has worked for 15 plus years in China and founded Baysource Global LLC in 2005. He's also worked for Partner Diamond Products and Mead Corporation and has been the entrepreneur in residence at the University of Tampa since 2017. And last but certainly not least, Titi Baccam is the Director of Government Relations at the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai. which is one of the co-sponsors of this event. So we really need to thank them for having brought together such a great team of experts to talk with you today. There she's responsible for AmCham Shanghai's advocacy efforts with Chinese and US government officials, including the Chamber's policy papers. Titi also oversees the Chamber's offices in Nanjing, Hangzhou, and California. AmCham Shanghai was founded in 1915. It was actually the third AmCham outside of the United States and is the largest American chamber in the Asia Pacific region. So again, thank you very much everyone for joining us. And now I pass the floor over to Art Dicker to talk a bit about protecting your intellectual property.
Thanks everyone for attending and dialing in. We're divided up. I've got about 20 minutes of time. So we're going to talk a bit about designing smart contracts, protecting your IP, and handling legal disputes. And I think some of the area of contracts I think we'll get into elsewhere in this discussion. So I'll probably go through that a little faster. And I think the legal disputes in the end, litigation and arbitration stuff is maybe stuff that you haven't heard as much about. So I'll try and spend a bit more time on that. Next slide, please. Myself, I think, we already got a bit of a background for me, so don't need to really go over this again. I've been in China for 15 years, fluent in Chinese, was previously in-house, as Chris mentioned. And so just been here a long time. And yeah, so hopefully that'll come through in the presentation. Our firm, next slide, please. Our firm is R&P China Lawyers. So yeah, if you could move to the next slide, please. So our firm, we've got 50 people on the ground here. We've got, as Chris mentioned, we primarily help international businesses doing business in China. And we are actually, though, a Chinese local firm. Next slide, please. So yeah, and then next slide again. So getting into smart contract design. So I think it's important, it goes without saying that clear contract terms are important in any contract, but I think especially when you're dealing with cross-border contracts where you have language issues, you have cultural issues, you have other issues where things need to be documented very clearly. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen contracts which are just way too simple. Do not, for example, talk anything about what happens if we have a dispute? Where do we go? Is it settled in China? Is it settled outside of China? How do I terminate the contract? What happens if there's a delay in payment? What about quality? Are there any warranties on quality of products delivered? How do I return products? And so a lot of this stuff is not included at all, except for the basic commercial terms. And that's really, to some extent, you can rely on that, but really you're kind of setting yourself up for problems later if you don't go that extra level of detail. And I don't have to be a lawyer to tell you that. I mean, obviously it's my interest to say that you need to document everything as much as possible, but really in my experience on some of these supply contracts, especially for smaller companies, it's really it's far too simple, and just a little bit more extra effort will get you a long way. So that's one thing. I think it's clear also that you need ability to walk away from the contract clearly if payment is not being made, if you are ordering goods from China and having them shipped. But at the same time, you cannot have also too one-sided of a contract, because that said, it just obviously goes without saying, it's setting yourself up for the other side to not honor the contract. And as we're going to get into later on, enforcement of these kinds of contracts, especially we're talking about cross-border parties involved, is very difficult and sometimes so costly potentially that it's almost makes the contracts unenforceable, sometimes de facto unenforceable. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So that is also to say that, you need to really keep monitoring the contract as you're going through it. So I think a lot of Chinese parties will kind of see how much they can get away with, for lack of a better way of putting it. And so I think it's important, as you are signing the contract, you also need to keep monitoring the contract. Don't be slow to raise issues of quality. And ideally, if you have a good contract, cite the terms in your contract which show the standards, the warranties they've made about quality, about delivery timelines, about shipping. These are the kind of things that when you have them in the contract, even if ultimately you both know that the contract is going to be difficult and costly to enforce in the end, if you have it there, you're monitoring it, and you are constantly reiterating it if you need to, the language still matters, the terms still matter, contract still matters, and even if there are issues about how easy it is to enforce the contract. So be proactive and be quick to potentially stop your side of the bargains, your side of the obligations of the contract if you see the other side not fulfilling its obligation. You may technically be also in breach of the contract, but more importantly is, look, you're not going to be sued for violating a contract if the other side is preemptively not delivering, right? Let's move to the next slide, please. So that gets me to, I think, really the most important point about drafting contracts is that it's really a mistake to leave, when you get to the end of the contract, you've gone through payment, delivery, quality, and some of the other logistics of the contracts, and what we might call the commercial terms. And then you get to the end of the contract, which people sometimes call the boilerplate, right? One of the things that's there, the most important thing among the boilerplate, is dispute resolution and enforcement of the contract. Where, like I mentioned before, where is the contract going to be enforced, and what kind of forum will the contract be enforced in? So the default is if you don't specify anything, basically then either side can, as long as there's a nexus to the contracts, the place where some of the contract is being performed, right? So typically that would at least mean you can sue the other side in your home country and vice versa. Now, that's the default, but that's usually not necessarily what you want to happen. So what you can do is you can draft into the contract, choosing first whether it's going to be arbitration or litigation. Arbitration is typically, as we're going to get into a little bit later, arbitration is typically faster and less expensive. It is less formal. And so a lot of sophisticated parties will pick arbitration because of this perceived speed advantages and simplicity of it. On the other hand, especially if you're talking about China, it goes against, it's a little counterintuitive because some people will typically assume that they have no chance of winning in a Chinese court as a foreign company. And I would say 20 years ago, absolutely, that's true. 10 years ago, there's still a lot of truth to that. But these days, and especially as my slides refer, especially in first-tier cities, so Shanghai, Beijing, maybe Shenzhen, and some of the other bigger cities, Hangzhou, where you can bring a case if your supplier is based or has business in that area, in that city, you can get quite a sophisticated court, which will be relatively impartial and will be able to understand your contracts. And the advantage of lawsuits is that if you get a verdict in your favor, the implementation of that verdict is much easier in local litigation. So you can have a foreign judgment in a U.S. court when you sue someone, when you sue a Chinese party for not performing the contract. But if they don't have any assets in the U.S. that you can get to easily, then there's no way to actually enforce the judgment that you win. Even if you go through arbitration in the U.S. or somewhere outside of China, say Singapore, for example, or even Hong Kong, which is considered a separate jurisdiction, you still have to take that arbitration award and bring it to a court in China for the court to recognize that arbitration award and then go to the procedures of enforcing the award against assets of your counterparty in China. And that's not so easy. And so in principle, yes, foreign arbitration awards are enforceable in China under the New York Convention, but there's still some practical difficulties about and costs and timing of also ultimately getting enforced. So what we recommend to our clients is when you're drafting the contract and you're thinking about enforcement, foreign judgments actually are not what you want because they're not, unless they have assets in the US. You actually want to be thinking about, is it feasible for me to sue the client, sue the counterparty in China? And if it is, that's where they surely have assets there. And you can, as I'll get to in another slide, you can even appoint, you don't have to be physically here on the ground. You can appoint a representative to bring the case on your behalf, and therefore through a power of attorney. And so that can be quite useful to be able to bring a case locally here, for all the advantages I just mentioned. And so that should be built into your contract, as that is, both parties agree that this is how we are going to resolve our disputes under this contract. Let's switch to bucket number 2. Next slide, please. And then next slide again. So IP, I'll do this part a little faster. So IP, I think most of you have an understanding of the different kinds of IP: trademarks for brand names, protecting brand names, patents for inventions and so forth, the domain names, copyrights, and trade secrets. So in China, the key thing is that your trademarks really should be registered here. And certainly that's the case if you're selling product into China, because you have to worry about, obviously you have to worry about copycats, counterfeit goods. You also have to worry about even just the threshold of getting on e-commerce platforms here. They have their own vetting process for that. Now I know that the audits may not be as relevant here, but even if you're a manufacturing, if you're getting your supply from manufacturers here in China, you still need to think about trademarking your brand in China as well, and that's a separate process. So some people do file for the global WIPO trademark process, but that's still a much more preferred option, is to have an original separate trademark filing done in China of your brand, your key brands, including Chinese versions of those brands that you choose. Patents is also, obviously patents is a much more expensive process to go through. If you have a patent in the US and you've also applied via PCT, you can potentially more easily do the filing here in China, and there are lots of reasons to do the patent filings here in China. And then the other areas are probably less relevant for the audience here, dealing particularly with Chinese manufacturers. Trade secrets, of course, if you're providing proprietary information on manufacturing processes, formulas, and so forth, you want to protect that by contract, confidentiality provisions within the contract, that these are trade secrets and should not be disclosed to outside parties. Let's skip ahead. Let's go to the next slide, please. So I think trademarks, it's been well kind of publicized in the media and whatnot, on some of the horror stories of brands popping up here and counterfeiting goods from foreign suppliers into the Chinese market. That can also, of course, apply going out of the Chinese market for making copycat brands and so forth. China itself, for filing a trademark, is a first to file system, which is different from the US. And here, basically, it's first come, first serve. And there's very little consequences if you file if you're a Chinese company and file a trademark in bad faith, meaning you don't actually have any product that really uses this name. It's clearly someone else's mark that's been developed and built up outside of China. And it's really hard to get rid of these guys sometimes who do this, these squatters or whatever you want to call them. And so you really have to take legal action, which is not easy, or you have to buy them out, or you maybe even have to do some rebranding if it's too costly. Let's go on to the next slide, because I want to save a few minutes just for the end. Yes, and one more. So the thing about litigation, which I've hit on a little bit, and I know I've got about five or so minutes left. So litigation in China, again, it used to be this idea that it's this bottomless pit, it's red tape, there's all of this bias in favor of local companies, and it's really not the case anymore. I mean, the courts have matured a lot, and that's because local companies have been demanding that the courts here become more sophisticated to protect their own IP, to settle their own sophisticated lawsuits. So generally, the bar has been raised across the board, and so local litigation can be successful. So I kind of want to just get people a bit off of that common misconception about that. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so China actually, just to further hit on that point, China actually ranks pretty high in terms of overall ability to enforce a contract. Now, you have the added challenges in many of our situations here, which is you're dealing with, again, with a cross-border element. So that does make it a little more complicated to bring evidence in, for example, as I'll get to in a second, to coordinate the actual lawsuit itself, and then to get enforcement of the judgment here when you have to rely on local support here, and you're not as well plugged in here if you don't have your own business here as much. But overall, and in a general sense, enforceability of contracts in China is actually pretty good compared to other countries, including some developed countries, as you see here. Next slide, please. And we've hit on some of these already, on some of the basics of litigation. In some ways, it is more formal, meaning, again, you need a lot of the evidence, if you're talking about litigation in a court as opposed to arbitration. A lot of the rules here are very much focused on written evidence and with relatively strict evidence rules. And the key thing, especially if you're dealing with proof and documentation coming from outside of China that's in English, for example, you need to get it translated. You need to get it notarized, including potentially legalized, for example, with the Chinese embassy in the US. And that part of it can be a bit cumbersome, for sure. But once you get here, for all the other reasons I've discussed, it can be quite advantageous to have litigation in China. On the other hand, when you are here on the ground in the actual litigation itself, it can actually, on the other hand, be quite informal. The process, the way that lawyers are actually allowed to relatively freely communicate with judges, including not, the US, you might know from, Hollywood TV shows and so forth, right? That a judge is not allowed to talk to one side without the other side being present, right? And in China, actually, that happens all the time. The lawyer calls up the judge and explains something that they're trying to work on to get the evidence through, and it's very informal like that, which is good and bad, I guess, to some extent. Let's go on to the next slide, please. So just a couple more slides to wrap up here. So, I've hit on this a bit already. Generally speaking, arbitration outside of China, and certainly litigation outside of China, I'll just hit on this point again, is easier from the foreign company's perspective. In fact, you very may well just get a default judgment for the other side just not basically showing up and contesting. But then you have to really think about, does that company have assets that I can get at to actually enforce the judgment? Because otherwise the judgment is not useful. And so Chinese courts are good. If getting to them is a bit of a technical process. Arbitration is faster, relatively fast, and international arbitration, again, because you have to get that award then enforced in China and recognized, is relatively slow. Let's go on to the next slide, please. Okay, and the last point I'll hit on is, look, even the whole process of litigation here is really just one extensive bargaining process, negotiation process, extended negotiation process. And this is true everywhere, but I think especially dealing with Chinese counterparties, is you are just building leverage one way or the other, one side or the other, for negotiating a settlement, because both sides know that litigation is costly. The Chinese side definitely knows that it's costly and cumbersome for you, both on the substance and especially on the procedure, to try and initiate a lawsuit and then get it ultimately recognized and enforced here in China. And they know this, and they're conscious of this. And so they're going to be expecting a settlement offer, knowing how costly it is for you to pursue litigation all the way to its final conclusion. And so even after you've won in court, and especially after you've won in court outside of China, there's still going to be room, and there's going to be expectation for a settlement, because the assets still be hard to find, so forth. You actually have to get the court to then enforce the judgment, and then follow on, you have to get the local police involved potentially to enforce the judgment as well. So for all these reasons, I really like to think of these disputes as the starting point is the contract, as even if we know enforcement is difficult, it's a moral argument. It's look, we all agree to this. It's clear on the contract. That's the starting point. If it gets to the more litigious stage, there's still negotiation. Should be room for negotiation all the way through because of the costs of pursuing litigation. And at the end, even after you've won, you still may need have difficulty getting at the assets you want and enforcing it. So that's still an opportunity to come up with a settlement. That's what I've got. I think I'll wrap it up there. Can you go just to the last slide if people, yeah, the last one more. Yeah, so feel free to reach out if any questions, and I'll be sticking around for the panel as well. This is my WeChat. If some of you have WeChat, feel free to scan the QR code and follow up on WeChat if you have any questions or want to get in touch. And my email here as well, ticker@rplawyers.com. And thanks.
We're going to talk about supply chain challenges and then what you can do to build resiliency into your operations. So having a plan, supplier management, trust and verify, what are the operations weak points, and what do I think you need to do now? I like to say that on-demand travel is, we got so comfortable with on-demand travel and it doesn't exist anymore. You don't even know that you can choose something 3 days from now, and trying to book something 3 months from now is even riskier than 3 days from now, because everything could change. That country's entry requirements in terms of testing or vaccination, whether the flights are still flying, what it takes to come back into the United States, it's all changing so constantly that it's difficult to plan even 3 days from now, because when you're overseas, the US may change its reentry requirements before you have a chance to get back, right? So that's really been so disruptive for travel. Quarantine is still required in many countries, anywhere from 4 days to 21 days and longer. My younger son just moved to Taiwan. He has a job out of college, yay, with Taiwan Semiconductor. So he's training in Taiwan for a year, and it was more than 3 weeks of quarantine. 2 weeks in the city that he landed in, and then another week in the city that he's living in. So, and in China, it can be even closer to 4 weeks. So, in addition to having difficulty with the flights and with the requirements, you also have these quarantine requirements. So this creates a problem for business people because you can't travel and meet with your partners overseas. So it makes operations and procedures and documents even more important than they were earlier. And I'm a big operations documents geek, so I've always believed them to be important, but they're even more important now. So what are the problems that are happening with your suppliers, right? There are still rolling citywide quarantines, testing or restrictions on traveling between cities. This is in China. And then other transportation and energy delays. So I started a WeChat group for foreign and Chinese supply chain executives to share with each other what's happening in their own environments. So we'll have someone on the Chinese side say, I had scheduled to go visit 5 factories next week, and 4 of them said, don't come. Because by having someone come in from outside the business, it raises them from green to yellow level because they could have introduced something, introduced COVID into that environment. It can be difficult to get train tickets. It can be difficult when you get into that city. You may have to show a code for that city. China is, I like to say, more like Europe than the United States. So, you go from Shanghai to Guangzhou, it's like going from Germany to Italy. They have their own regulations, they have their own restrictions. It's not the same thing. So it's become very difficult to travel within the country. Companies might be shut down because there's been a wave in their city, or they may have workers that have not been able to return because of travel restrictions. That's especially prevalent during Chinese New Year, when a lot of people travel home and then maybe they have difficulty coming back, or when they come back, they're expected to quarantine before they work in the facility. They may not have their normal workforce, and so they've had to pull from a less desirable pool of candidates that they're retraining. So those aren't the individuals they've had working for them before. They may have cash flow issues, and if you follow me on LinkedIn, I shout about this a lot. Because imagine being a business owner in China and you're all of your customers, first you were shut down at the beginning of COVID, and then you ramped back up again and were pushing up your production, and all of a sudden your customers canceled a lot of orders overseas because of shutdowns that were happening overseas. And then they came back a couple months later and ramped up a bunch of orders, and now your raw material supplier shut down. So they've got a lot of cash tied up in raw materials that maybe they can't use, in finished good orders that customers have canceled. And Chinese banks don't do operating capital loans. Typically, they do asset-based lending. So it can be very difficult to fund cash flow as a Chinese business. So always when we do supplier qualifications for clients, we always look at how are they financing the business? But it's even more important now to look at that than it was before. And then what stressors were there before? Did you have an aging owner and no clear succession plan? Maybe had they become wealthy enough that the owner was investing in restaurants and KTVs, which are what I call karaoke with benefits on the second floor. So, maybe they were diverting cash out of the business, and now all of a sudden they're struggling because they don't have the cash they need when there's so much stress on the company. So whatever problems you had before are only going to be made worse now. And then the government has been offering a lot of help, the Chinese government, and are they taking advantage of that, right? Because that would help them with cash flow, with their payables, to keep workers employed. So hopefully they're making use of that. And then on the customer distributor side, because supply chain really accommodates both, how are they representing your product in the market, and how do you know? Normally you could go over and fly over and visit your customers, visit your distributors, train them, and you really can't right now. So do you have a mechanism in place to find out how your product's being represented in the market? Are there challenges with installation, with product use, with warranties? That again, maybe you had someone who was traveling, or you had more eyes on than you do right now. What about too many distributors focusing on import foreign goods, that have signed their agreement in headquarters in North America or Hong Kong? So I'd like to follow up on what Art said about where your contracts are located. I cannot tell you how many times, even with my billion-dollar client-sized companies, they bring me a contract that their lawyers have looked at, and it's a contract for a distributor in Beijing with a warehouse in Nanjing, and the contract is with the Hong Kong company or with the Canadian company. And I'm like, good luck with that. If you're not signing the contract with the company that's actually doing the work, then you lose a lot of leverage, and you lose a lot of ability to actually enforce that agreement. I understand why the Canadian-owned company, there's a very famous Canadian e-commerce company that a couple of my clients have used. If I were advising the Canadian company, I would probably have told them the same thing, right? Because then they can get paid in Canada or Hong Kong, and they can trap some of the profit there and then only pay a smaller amount to China, and it's easier than getting your profit out of China. But for my client who's trying to protect their interests in China, it doesn't help them. Right? So I understand why the distributor did it. It's a good decision for them, but it's not a good decision for my client. And it shocks me how many billion-dollar companies are using this Canadian e-commerce giant and probably signed that contract without a blink, right? And they still like me, even though I make their life difficult. So logistics, it's an overused word. And right now it's extremely, extremely fluid what's happening with logistics. It's changing all the time. I'm sure you all know about the price of ocean freight. We've got empty containers in the wrong ports. Ports are blocked with ships waiting to unload. Domestic transport in the US, we have a lot of trucking disruption. So we're having a hard time moving things domestically here. And then rail, they use trucking in China. They use more rail and river than we do in the US. And one of the challenges is some of these, again, it's very distributed power in China. So some of these small cities and ports along the country, they're forcing their people to quarantine. So you arrive with a river vessel, and before you can unload the goods, your staff have to quarantine for 4 days. So that delays the turnaround time on these river vessels. It can happen with the trains. So that's made things much, much more complicated. Air freight, many flights have been canceled. There's been a big reduction in capacity because of that. A lot of commercial passenger flights carry a lot of freight. And those flights are not going on because no one can get into the country and no one's traveling. Warehouses can be over capacity, flooded with goods, and customers aren't taking delivery. So even warehouses and ports in the US are in many ways flooded with inventory many times. That's a problem I hear. And then staffing issues. There's not enough people, they're not trained. I'm an advisor for the New Zealand government, New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. I help New Zealand companies do international trade. And I had a call with a New Zealand company shipping into Houston, and they had loaded the container in New Zealand. You always weigh your containers. They weigh your container at the port in New Zealand, ship the container via ocean, and it comes into Houston, and they say it weighs 3,000 pounds more, and it's now overweight. So it's pretty much impossible that that container gained 3,000 pounds in transit. So, and they were fighting with the port authorities in Houston for a few days, and they didn't come to me till after they had to pay these overweight fees, and it had been moved into a storage facility. And I said, in all likelihood, it was human error. The person that was weighing that container might not have reset the balance to take out the container itself weight, or who knows. And you know, because they just don't have regular staff in a lot of these facilities anymore. So we see a lot more problems with human error than we used to have. So I can guarantee you, because again, this is my geeked out, you know, trigger point. Your documents are not sufficient enough. I am crazy about your documents being sufficient. If you're not telling your supplier or distributor what to do, how can you expect them to do it? Right? And if I were to look at your documents, I would tell you they're not clear enough. If it's not simple enough that you can hand it to a 12-year-old and they can't ask you any questions and they have to do it without you, it is not simple enough, because you're making too many assumptions about what your intention is, or that everyone understands this is what's acceptable quality, or this is what everyone understands, this is how a wheelchair works, right? So one of my clients in the medical equipment industry said to me, I said, let me look at your paperwork. And it said the wheels need to work on all floor surfaces. What does that mean? If you've been to China, they don't have indoor carpeting like this. 99% of the homes and the offices have tile floors. So are they expecting that a wheelchair needs to work on carpet? No. So if you're not going to be clear enough, I don't want you to, or you will, you'll come back to me and I'll slap you on the hand, right? That it was your fault that you made this mistake. So if your language uses boxes similar to what other customers use and good quality, what do you think you're going to get? If you're not saying this is the weight of the cardboard, this is the tensile strength of the cardboard, if you're not being super specific, then you're going to have problems. So could you have, one of the other questions I ask clients, could you have complete staff turnover and the system continues to operate? Typically, no. We have too much legacy knowledge in many of our businesses that we have, and that's in the factories. I see it in production operations that we're working on, in supply chain and accounting. I'm a CPA too, again, just to ramp up my geek quotient a little bit higher. So, you know, you see it in all these documents. We just assume that this is how everybody does it, and that's not true. So you really need to be very specific and very clear so that if someone else comes into the organization, could they really run it without whoever's doing it now? And it helps you when I work on these with clients, going through the process helps you make decisions, and you recognize where things are not clear, and it forces the organization to make decisions about who has the authority to approve this or not. What kind of documents do we really need to accept it? And those are all really great exercises, because so many organizations, you start here and you grow and you add people and you pivot in this direction. And the next thing you know, you're in a very different place than you were before. And yet your systems, you haven't updated your documentation. You know, so your systems don't reflect where you are now. So I'm a big stickler on that. Overall, supply chain management programs contain product documentation. And if you only have engineering drawings and not specification sheets, I'm going to slap you over the hand too. Quality control documents, written procedures for the whole process, approval steps for key milestones, supplier qualification before you use a supplier and ongoing, documents that force compliance in everyone. I'm not an ISO level document person. I'm not trying to get things just to have paperwork, But what I love about forms that somebody has to sign is that it forces them to behave in a particular way. If they have to fill out that form and they have to sign and submit it, I know they're going to do whatever action it is I want them to do. And so sometimes it's not so much that I need that information, is that I want to force them to do whatever it is that that form reflects. So, that's where I prefer to have forms and things, because it forces people to follow certain procedures. Your quality control system, what are your expectations, your inspections, a rating system, quality failure procedures, metrics for choosing suppliers, developing a product, accepting changes. The minute you have, I worked for a client, I had a client early this year and last year, a couple of projects. They are so loosey-goosey in that company that it drives me nuts. The minute you tell your supplier in China, oh, it's okay for this shipment, if this fabric is a little bit more gray than black, we're okay with that. Well, I can guarantee you from now on, if there's a variation in that fabric, they're just going to accept it, because you've set the expectation that's they can say that, they can accept it. So if you don't have a form that says we only accept this material variation for this purchase order and this shipment and no other, then you're buying yourself trouble in the future, because they will make exceptions in the future on that same thing, because they're learning, you're teaching them and they're learning from it, right? You're willing to accept a color variation, in the future we'll accept a color variation. So overall distributor supply chain programs, you want product documentation, key features, usage, repair, written procedures on how to sell the product. Again, don't assume. Periodic objective data that's being shared back to the US. I have a client right now with a factory in China, and they do not get no one in the US was on the Chinese, they own the factory 100%. No one in the US was on the bank account in China, had access to the Chinese bank account. And the CFO, who's busy with a million other things, because they have 3 plants in the US, he's like, why do I need that? I said, again, I'm gonna smack you on the hand. Don't ask me, I'm telling you, because if something is to happen in the future that you become uncomfortable with management at that plant or with what's happening, it's a little too late now. It's a red flag to them to ask to go on the bank account. So just be on it. And if you don't check it for 6 months, fine, but at least you're on it, right? And when you do want to check it, you have access. The same thing with reports. Don't say, I'll ask you for, when I want to see the QC inspection forms, I'll ask you. Have them sent to you every time. And if you just throw them in a folder and you don't look at them, I don't care. But when you need them, the habit has been built that they're sending them to you and you have them already, and you don't have to go back and say, send me the last 3 months of inspection forms, right? So build into your systems that you have all of this now. Again, distributor qualification, the same as vendor, customer return complaint procedures, sales training programs that are ongoing, define process for them to import into their market, sell and pay for goods. So how are they pricing it when they're bringing it into the country? And how much control and knowledge do you have of that? Metrics for choosing, managing distributors, developing and approving market materials and advertisements, customer returns, local materials. You want to have some kind of, again, metrics or documents around all of these things and more. Because what tends to happen is you've got some American engineer who's been going back and forth to China for 10 years. And you say, wow, we really need a new distributor. And he's like, oh, I know a guy. I know a guy. I met a guy in the elevator. I can't tell you how many times I heard that story. I met a guy in the elevator in Shanghai, and he's in that business. We could use him. Would you do that here? Would you say I met a guy, at the grocery store picking out my vegetables, and he said he's a distributor, so I think we'll give him our business? Like, seriously? And yet people do that in China all the time. So what happens if it's weak, if your systems are weak? If you don't state the expectations, they are going to make the decisions. And again, you're going to come to me and say, look at how this factory screwed up. And I'm going to look at the documents and say, here's how you set them up to screw up, right? Here's how you created that situation. It's your fault and theirs, but mostly yours. In part because the only behavior you can control is your own. So being focused on what someone else is doing wrong is not helpful. How can I change my behavior and my systems and my procedures to make this better? That's the only thing you have any control over. Again, procedures, authorization matrices, signed documents, checks and balances. And then there's something I call the Superman syndrome. This is, as I was talking about, we fly that engineer back and forth. That's Superman, right? We fly him over to China to fix everything. Well, when he's in China, he's Superman. He's taller, richer, and better looking. So he doesn't want to stop doing that because it's fun. He's staying in a fancy hotel. Everybody tells him how amazing he is. Chinese culture is very generous, you know, and kind and respectful. So they're telling him, we couldn't do it without you, Frank. You're the best guy ever. And Frank is like, oh, thanks. You know, so then when Frank goes home, he's just Clark Kent. His wife's yelling at him to take out the garbage. You know, his colleagues are giving him a hard time. Who doesn't want to be Superman and not Clark Kent? So consequently, when these guys are flying back and forth, it's not in their personal interest to fix the underlying problems that you're having, because then they can't fly back and forth anymore. I had a conversation with the CFO and I was helping the company with, I forget what even, it was probably 4 years ago. And I said, why are you still sending these 2 engineers over there 2 or 3 times a year? You've got a staff of 15 people. It's a very consistent product. And he's like, you know how it is, they want to go. And the CEO is not going to stop them from going. But again, you're embedding bad habits into your system, because now the staff don't expect to make decisions. They don't expect to take responsibility because this guy always comes over and does it, right? And I see this in so many companies. So the supply chain disruption that we have right now in COVID is teaching you what your weaknesses are. Use that as an opportunity to fix them, not just patch it. Okay, let's really fix whatever it is so that you're stronger going forward. Partner management. What is partner management? You want to qualify, pre-qualify, annual qualification, keep it measurable and actionable. You want to communicate details with your partners so that you set them up for success. Have everything in writing always. You know, how many times, I have a long training class I do on business communication in China and how to work together that I started for Disney many years ago. And, you know, I always tell people, emails don't cost money. So you could have 3 emails instead of 1. How many times do you have an email that starts out about the purchase order, and then over a couple of weeks, it segues into a quality issue, and yet the reference on the top of the email is still purchase order? And though 6 months later, you go back looking for it and you can't find it. So I'm, again, a little bit OCD about if the topic changes, I change the title on the top so I can find it, or I start a new email. And better yet, you have those things documented somewhere, so you're not just digging through all of your emails trying to find out where you had conversations about all of these things. Be very aware of payment changes, staff changes, what's their financial health. You know, again, you need to keep an eye on what's going on with their business. Are they struggling? You know, are they, in this last 2 COVID years, I can't tell you how many calls I've gotten are from Argentina, from Israel, from all over, of companies who have long-term partners in China. And then all of a sudden they stop communicating. It just stops. And the Americans are like, this one guy was like, oh, they're lying, they're horrible, all of this is happening. And we sent somebody in China to go meet with them, and they actually were just so stressed. They had customers cancel orders, they had cash flow issues. They had been so jerked around by so many different foreign clients that they just didn't trust anybody anymore. And they were super stressed about it. But it had gone so far by the time we got involved, we couldn't repair the relationship. And we ended up having to find the American another supplier. But this is a relationship at the end of the day, right? And you need to honor it as such. And this is the hippie world peace side of my personality. So you need to be respectful and kind, and what's good for them is also good for you. So trying to get them to lower their price to the point that they're losing money is not really good for you in the end, right? Be a good partner, not a schmuck. So are your suppliers getting raw materials? Who are their sub-suppliers? These are things you need to know. Suppliers and distributors, what terms are they on? Are their suppliers and customers operational? Are they getting paid if they lost a lot of business? Can they still hold inventory? How is their cash flow? It's more important than ever. How well are people communicating and staying on task? How well are you giving them clear priorities and directions? They will have peaks and valleys because if they have customers all over the world and slowdowns, how do you fit into that? Do you know? Are you communicating that with them? And then force majeure in contracts and purchase orders. And that's more Art's wheelhouse than mine, but it's important to look at. So trust and verify. I'm a big fan of trust and verify. I call it aspirational lying. This is another one of my trademarked with the Superman complex. Aspirational lying, Americans don't do in business as much because we're a country run by lawyers. So there's a lot of litigation if you're doing aspirational lying. We do it in our personal lives more than we do it in our business lives. But in other countries that are not so litigation heavy, they do it in business too. You see it in India, you see it in China, you see it in a lot of other countries. Basically what it means is somebody's telling you what they wish were true. So you'll see on the website an image of the factory, and then I'll actually go visit. It looks nothing like that, but it will look like that eventually once they've made enough money and they can rebuild, So maybe they don't have the capability to make your product right now, but they're making things close to it, but they want to develop the capability and they believe they can, so they tell you they can. And again, we do that in personal relationships more than we do it in business here, but you see it in business. Nothing replaces boots on the ground. We have, various people in China that we've helped. So we've helped Maryann. I met Maryann at one of these a few years ago. And so we're helping her with this and other clients where you just need somebody to go in, knock on the door and check out how things are really going, right? What's really happening with my orders? How are things working? Ask for incremental, indirect data. So if you ask success failure questions, how's everything going? They're going to say fine. Are you going to ship on time? They're going to say yes, right? Whereas if you ask for incremental data, can I see the material certifications from the raw materials that you just received for our production to start next week? If they can't produce those, they're not going to falsify them. They're not lying to that extent. If they can't produce it, then maybe they haven't received the raw material yet. So you have to be creative about what kind of objective data could we collect on this that would indirectly show me what's happening. And then verify, have outside auditors go in and take a look at it. What are weak points? Conflict internally in the US. Are you sending mixed messages to them between different employees they don't know how to act on? Communicating piece by piece and not issuing documents. I had a client many years ago making silk pajamas, and she had said to the Chinese team, I want you to make the neck wider, but she didn't reissue the specification sheets with the new measurement. So being a really good clothing factory, they knew that if you make the neck wider, it's a bigger person. And the shoulder drop should be longer too. So when they sent the samples back, it had more than just the neck changed because they were trying to do the right thing, right? If she had sent the documents over with only that one measurement changed, it would have been clear. Making assumptions is a problem, not communicating in enough detail, setting the wrong precedent, settling into a routine. So things that you need to do, steps to secure your supply chain. How much time do I have? Am I already way over? Okay. So, these are all things you can do. Verify your partners, increase your inspection criteria, have somebody take a look at it. Oh, that was the end anyways. And I'm here for the panels.
Thank you very much, Kim. So we've heard from an attorney to talk about how to protect your IP. We've heard from Kim on how to optimize your supply chain. And now we're fortunate to hear from Maryann Kilgallon about what it's like to do this as a business owner here in Orlando, starting up a new supply chain. So I think you're going to get some really interesting information from her. If you want to come up, Maryann.
All right. Hello, everyone. Yeah, the good, the bad, and the ugly. That's the first thing that came to mind when I knew that I wanted to tell, the journey, because you really have to be prepared. I wasn't prepared. I thought I was. And you have to have the head on that you're going to learn as you go, and things aren't going to work out, and timelines don't work. And so This is how I start. And so I want to start with the ugly of it. Unfortunately, once you decide to do business in China, you're on the other side of the world. It's not like you can just get in your car and drive, or even a short flight. So it's something that you really have to consider. Is this the only option that I have? Many people that I've heard talk say, I gave somebody a large deposit because we talked on the emailing back and forth. They got a really nice website. And it turns out that the company went out of business 3 or 4 years ago, but there's some pretty savvy people that are still trying to lure in business, knowing that the people that they're talking to are on the other side of the world. So that can be the ugly of it. Without you being there, you have no control. They can tell you this is happening, but do you know it's really happening? The time difference can be very brutal. I don't work 9 to 5. A lot of times my meetings start at 9, 10, even 11 o'clock at night. And then I have to get back up because I'm doing business in another country and be up at 7 a.m. So you really have to realize that once you go into this, there's no normal. And the bad is, where do you start? How do you start? Who can you trust? You can go on Google and just open a Pandora's box and be overwhelmed. There's so much information, and there's so many different organizations that say they can help you. And there's so many different books to read, and there's so many speakers. And so it can be overwhelming. So it's really good. And I'm really happy that I met Kim 2 years ago when I was thinking about starting this. How can you communicate? You know, it's another language, you know. I've had to, on several occasions, hire an interpreter to transcribe some conversations for me, and even some text, because I wanted to be sure. Am I protected? Many people think, well, because I have a patent, you know, it's mine. And believe me, the patent doesn't really mean anything in that jurisdiction. Think about it. There's $1 million companies, $100 million companies that have had their idea stolen, and there's knockoffs. So me, who do I think that I can stop this? The reality is you can't. You can do the best that you can, but it's just, remember, be an open mind, and it's a challenge. But the good news, there is good news. And if you set yourself up with people that maybe have experience in, like with Art, with the attorney, with Kim's company, myself and other people that have done the process, know the wording, know the logistics of everything that goes into it, it can be a lot easier. Yes, everybody knows, why is everybody doing business in China? Is because of the cost. For me, myself, my product cost, everything complete, packaging, just if those that don't know, we're creating a wearable safety device with a mobile app. So my cost, $48. I tried to get pricing all over, even somewhere here in Lake Mary and all over the country. Everybody was $300, $350 for one piece. How am I supposed to sell that to the consumer? It's not going to happen. So that's why everybody decides that's honestly the only option for many companies, even for $1 million companies, let alone somebody that's just me, a solo founder. The good news is that a lot of companies will allow you to have minimums. I was ordering one when I first wanted to decide what I was doing. What I ended up doing is I ended up going and getting products, samples from 7 or 8 different manufacturers, had them all come in, and I kind of looked at the quality, and I was able to see what I liked, what I didn't like, certain features, in order to try to think and navigate of what I want to create for my product. If anybody knows what Alibaba is, that's a good start to just think about it and see what's out there. It's, believe me, you want to do that when you got 3 or 4 hours to do nothing else, because you'll spend that much time. It's so much information. There's so much products out there that you're going to say, I can't believe I can create this product. And it's faster time, so it doesn't take as long as you building something, you know, getting all the documents, all of your builder materials, everything. When I called them 3 days later, they were sending me sketches, and I just couldn't believe the fastness of it. Again, you're able to work with companies just like Kim's company to go over. I actually, second time around, I had Kim have her boots on the ground go. And before I decided to give that deposit, I had somebody there go and meet with the CEO, meet with my rep that I was dealing with, take pictures, look at their permits, look at their licensing. Give me a green light before I send that large deposit, because I just didn't want to let that go until I have that peace of mind. Does that mean that everything was going to be perfect from that day forward? No. So, but it is something that is available to us. Luckily, there are organizations that can help you. You don't have to do it alone. What I did, does anybody know what CES is? The Consumer Electronics Show. It's in Vegas every year. It's the largest show pretty much on the planet. About 180,000 people show up worldwide. I went there 2 years in a row. The first year we were like what we call in the basement, where there's about 1,000 startups with their tech idea. And you got literally a booth about the size of this. It's like 8 by 8 booth. And you're there with 1,000 other startups worldwide. And people are walking by and there's shows and everything. But what happens is that every manufacturer on the planet, if it has to do with PC boards, material, anything that you're building that has to do with that, they're there. So I went and I got bags full of brochures of all these companies that I thought they might be someone I'm going to work with. Came back home and just spent literally a month and a half going through each one, putting the no's, the yes, and the maybe pile, and then narrowed it down to who I wanted to work with. I went back the next year and I didn't have a booth, but I went back specifically just to have appointments. And so I met with the top 3 that I had chosen and wanted to meet more face-to-face and talk more pricing, more details. And that's how I made my decision. So there's a lot of events, expos that you can reach out to as far as you deciding what products you want to help build. And also referrals, if you know anybody else that has done it, they can maybe give you a name. Those referrals are okay, not someone in the elevator, but someone that actually says, hey, I know this manufacturer or I've done it. I think that's it. I know it's short, but I was told to keep it short, and that's my contact information. If you have any questions, I'm happy to reply to emails, phone calls, and I'm going to be here throughout the whole presentation. So good luck to everyone.
Now we're going to get into the Q&A portion of the event where we get to hear from our experts both here and in China. And we have David Alexander joining us from Tampa Bay. So once we've got everybody up there, maybe I can ask David and Titi to say a little bit about their organization. So David, if you want to talk a bit about what it is that Baysource does for businesses that are looking to get started having their own supply chain with China.
Sure, and thanks for having me today, Chris, and great presentations by our Kimberly and Maryann. My 30-second elevator pitch is that you know how you need to have something manufactured offshore or in Asia, but you're worried about intellectual property theft and quality control. We're the guys that make sure you don't have to worry about that. And so I started Baysource in 2005 out of a very practical need in a former life when I was in the health and beauty care business, and we needed bottles and caps, and the best price we could get on the tooling for the bottles and caps was $300,000. And we ultimately found a supplier in China that made the same necessary tool for $30,000. And instead of 28 cents a pair, the product was 12.5 cents a pair. And that's when the light bulb went off. So began Baysource in 2005 to help small and medium-sized businesses take advantage of the same low-cost country sourcing opportunities in China. And so we are boots on the ground. We're 70 plus people based in Shanghai. We cover the entire country. And so much of what Kimberly and then Maryann spoke about, and of course, Art with IP protection just rings true. Great presentations, and whoever's listening or participating today, there's some great information there. And I'd love to expand on a few of those topics later on in the presentation.
Thank you, David. And then Titi, could you maybe talk a little bit about what the AmCham Shanghai does and how it helps American businesses that are looking to establish manufacturing or other relationships in China?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks for organizing this great event. AmCham Shanghai, as you said, is one of the largest chambers in Asia. One of our missions is to help companies not only in China succeed, but also American companies trying to get the China market. So we have many member companies like ART who help American companies learn more about China, provide them with services for legal services and other things. For us, our goal is really to support the relationship between the US and China and to provide more information for companies, whether it's about regulations, what's the most important market, how to maneuver in this market, what are some of the challenges that are facing you. We just produced a survey, and the big picture about China is companies are still doing well. Most of our companies have recovered from COVID. 80% have reported increased profits, increased revenues, increased optimism. So companies are still doing well, even though there are problems. And if there are problems, there are companies in China willing to help American companies with those problems. So we're happy to be a part of that and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. The first question we got online comes from Danielle Jiang, and she was asking regarding the law, which country's law should foreign enterprises use for the agreement with their Chinese suppliers? I think that would be for you, Art.
Yeah, sure. I'll be quick. I think it all goes back to what I kept hitting on in my presentation. Where are you ultimately trying to enforce the contract? And if you're being pretty practical about it, and you're going to ultimately have to enforce the contract in China, then the law should be Chinese law, actually. And I know that might strike some people as a bit counterintuitive or not what they might be used to, but there's lots of law. US law is what we call common law, so you can pick other countries. If it's anything that's controversial that you need to actually negotiate, you can pick Hong Kong, Singapore. These are all very similar to US law. They've all kind of stemmed from original UK common law. But even still, I mean, Chinese commercial law is not going to vary that much from US law. And so you shouldn't feel like it's going to be too different from what you're used to. And at the same time, from an enforceability perspective in a Chinese court, you're going to have Chinese law is going to serve you so much better just on speed and familiarity. So I would actually choose Chinese law in most cases.
Excellent. Now, so are there any questions in the room for the panel? If not, maybe I'll start off with Kim and ask a question about, you talked a little bit about some of the financial challenges that suppliers in China are facing. Are US customers likely to be asked to maybe change their regular payment options and provide some money up front? Is that a good thing? Should you as a purchaser, or if you see that your supplier in China is experiencing some financial challenges, should you volunteer to let me know what some of your upfront costs are for my order, just to make sure that your order is given the right priority for getting completed?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And yeah, if you have a good relationship with your supplier, if you've worked with them for a while, hopefully they do tell you, that they're under a lot of financial strain and you are able to help them, because that's a part of being a good partner. If it's a new supplier to you and you don't have a lot of experience with them, then you may want to be a little more cautious to find out, what's really happening to them financially, what are they using the money for, and just make sure you're being a little more careful about it. But yeah, definitely, this is a good time to be a good partner. Good partners get their orders manufactured more quickly. You're a priority for the supplier, because they know that it's more than just an order, it's a relationship, and they want to help take care of you too. So part of that relationship is you doing well by them. And if that means helping them with their cash flow issues, then that's a good thing to do.
Thanks. Is there anything anyone else would like to add to that? Okay.
Thank you. So Maryann, I heard your struggles you went through as a business owner. So for people in the room and also on the people on our presentation, what would you recommend that as the starting point for when you start in Google search and start looking for if you wanted to develop your product in China? What would you not do, or would you do instead of starting Google search? Where would be your starting point now if you want to develop your product, or you want to have a supply chain, or you want to have somebody who can manufacture your product? Where would you start from now?
I definitely would recommend that if you're going to start, first of all, if you're already certain that this is a product you're going to make, if this is something that you have an idea and you're not really sure, I definitely would make sure you would do a patent search, of our search, just to make sure. But if you've already cleared that hurdle, connect with other organizations. You really don't want to go it alone. You want to actually connect with someone that can give you a referral that says, I use this company and they helped me and they did this and that. And it's all about relationships. So if you have an idea and you go meet with the company, let them guide you, let them direct you. And you don't want to jump forward, because I did that mistake. I started doing things ahead of time when I realized later, well, I should have did this first. So talking to people ahead of time before you make any financial investment, before you sign any contracts, is what I would recommend that you do. Working with a company that you can easily pick up the phone and call and email to give you guidance. Even if you have to put somebody on, if you're just starting out and the funds aren't there, you can possibly ask them to be on a retainer, and you're not paying them a whole month up front, but until you can figure it out, you can have, somebody on a retainer to help you.
May I just add or ask some of the other speakers is there anything that you'd add in terms of how can you help be the boots on the ground for somebody like Maryann, who may not be able to travel to China, but definitely has interest and needs to, help with the verification side of things that Kim has spoken about?
So a key part of our business model is we help to identify, verify, and qualify suppliers. And we feel that there's no substitute for an in-person visit. Somebody mentioned that earlier. And we take it to another level for our B2B customers, which is a full factory audit, which uncovers everything you would want to know if you were a purchasing manager or an owner. Everything from financial health of a supplier to registered capital to, and this will kind of cover 2 points. Somebody talked about, when we get into IP issues and we try to identify suppliers and manufacturers for our clients that are purely contract manufacturers. They're not marketers, so they are very adept at manufacturing what they do, whether it's injection molding, electromechanical, metalworks, whatever, and that they're not going to show up at the same trade shows as our clients competing in the same categories. So we like an unsavvy, from a marketing standpoint, supplier who's focused on doing just that. And I'll also mention, Kim got into some good points about quality and changes to products. We do help our clients and the factories understand fit and finish. So we need for everybody to agree on the material specifications and testing requirements for finished goods. And with our work with the factories, of course, we're doing inline production, observations and testing, but you can't inspect quality into a finished order. We say that you can't inspect quality back into an order. So we heavily recommend developing a product manual, product deck on your product that you're having manufactured to cover all of these different issues and specifications.
I would just want to add real quickly, that every different types of companies have different scenarios. So for Maryann, she doesn't have an R&D team in the US that she does. She has people that are working on her product. But so she needed a factory that had a more robust R&D department that actually was already making the product in a similar fashion to what she wanted to make. So in some circumstances, that's the kind of manufacturer that you're looking for, because you're a startup and you don't have, 30 people working or 500 people working for you. In other situations, the kinds of companies that typically Dave's working with and was just talking about, they have that capability in the US. It's an existing product. They've already designed it. They have the documentation. So they can work with an OEM in China that doesn't have those capabilities. And then Dave's company in China, Baysource, can also act as the trading company. And really they can manage and control some of that for you and buy from the supplier and resell to you. So, so there's different, depending on how far you are in developing the product, if you've already manufactured it, like where you are also influences what system you go through, what process you use. The other thing I would say is that having a factory qualification, obviously all of us up here agree on that. But having a factory qualification is like sending somebody in to make sure that Kentucky Fried Chicken makes chicken. Are they making chicken? Do they have the equipment to cook chicken? Are they selling chicken? Are there lots of people buying chicken? It's not the same thing as if I'm going to place an order for 200 buckets of chicken next week, is my order going to go well? Because who knows who's working that day, and if they've had some problem with getting raw material, the raw chicken in, something went wrong. So it's supplier qualifications are a step in the process, but as Maryann said, you have to remember it's just a step, and no matter how well it's done, or what information you've got to stay very on top of all of it all the way along, because they're going to have their own issues with raw materials or staff showing up or whatever. So don't be lulled into and you were not, but I mean, some companies are lulled into this. We did a supplier qualification, so now everything's going to go well. So, it's just a step in the process.
Thanks. I think that really underscores for listeners that when people get into international trade, you may be doing so for yourself, but you don't have to do it by yourself. There's a lot of people out there to help you overcome many of the challenges that that you identify yourself, and then also they'll help you to identify what are the right questions you need to be asking yourself, you need to be asking your supplier. So that's a really key learning for anyone who's getting started in international trade. And now Khalid had a question.
Question. Thank you. This is perhaps for Kimberly. I don't need the mic, but it's okay. Yeah, I do. Okay. All right. For Kimberly, you mentioned that suppliers sometimes shut down and they don't answer you back, and you find out later that there's some level of stress. What would you recommend or say about communicating with them as I understand, the Chinese culture is more of a safe face and indirect communication style. How would you bring them back to the negotiating table or talking table, given the fact that you want your product to be released or bought or any other way? So
yeah, that's a great question. I always say that Chinese culture can be defined in 2 words: failure avoidance. So no one, and not just because they don't want to fail themselves, but primarily they don't want to disappoint you. There's a tremendous feeling of pressure that I've committed something to you and we've had this good relationship, and I'm afraid now that I'm going to disappoint you. So it's, I recommend to companies, that you once a month, no matter what, whether you have orders or don't have orders with that particular supplier, once a month you send an email and you say, hey, we just had Thanksgiving in the United States. Here's a picture of my family and I, at Thanksgiving, and I was thinking about you. I just wanted to tell you how much I appreciate, your support. And so you keep that, you're keeping that communication going. You're keeping the communication open. And so a lot of times in these difficult conversations, you might start the topic on one thing, hey, Mr. Wong, we're going to have another order for you next month. How are things going? And they say, okay. But as you keep going in the conversation, then they may be more forthcoming about, well, we've actually had some trouble with our other customers. And we as Americans tend to be much more, what do you mean by that? Get to the point. Why is that a problem? And it's better to be a little softer and say, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. What kind of problems have you had? Let them feel comfortable, not challenged. And then if they feel comfortable, then they're more likely to come back and say, well, we've had this go wrong and that go wrong, because otherwise they feel, they don't want you to lose confidence in them. One of my other favorite things I love to quote is, don't attribute to malice what can be attributed to stupidity, is my restatement of it. A lot of times we think somebody's trying to cheat us, or they've lied to us, or they're withholding anything. And actually it's that they made a mistake. Someone made a mistake and they didn't double check the quality, or they didn't think to look at something, and then they didn't realize until late that it was a problem. And in that situation, if you punish them for that mistake, they're less likely to tell you in the future they made one. So you want to continue in those difficult times to be a good partner and say, well, they say, well, we missed this. We didn't realize that we got this wrong. Then you say, well, I appreciate your telling me that, and how can I help you fix it now? Right. So Chinese American negotiation tends to be, we're sitting on the opposite side of the table and it's a win-lose scenario. So, I'm going to get better and you're going to give a little, right? I'm going to get a little, you're going to give a little, or I have to give some and you're going to get some. And Chinese negotiation is really win-win. And so part of this conversation is that you're encouraging someone to come over to your side of the table, and you're sitting next to each other and talking about what we can do together and how we can fix it together. And we're in this together, and how can we help each other? And that's much more effective in the end.
Thank you very much for that great presentation on different subjects. I've been to China, and the easiest way I found to do business in China was to take my Chinese partner who's based in Orlando, because he has all the resources. So that makes things easier. My question to the speakers, it's a tough question, so you might have to put all your brains together, is that how much of this supply chain disruption is political, economic, muscle flexing by China, and how much is it due to the natural causes?
Well, I'll start with, let's take some ABCs of supply chain. All the things we've discussed today and Kim's discussed, very valid today. I can't talk to politics because I'm not a politician, but I will tell you that the real numbers are that our ports are the bottleneck today. So we are not sending enough containers back to China. Finished goods are piling up in Chinese factories. Cash flow, as Kim mentioned, is being crunched. And so there's a huge stress on the supply chain because we have some antiquated policies and practices in our own ports. So we can begin looking at other ports. So here in Florida, why not Tampa? We've in Bradenton. I mean, we've got other ports besides Long Beach, but the containers still are stacking up. The prices are coming down a little bit, but and then the other thing I'll say is that in the past decade, there are fewer Chinese factories making quality products, not more. So simple Econ 101 is impacting this. And of course, we started with Chinese New Year. We went right into COVID. We went into PPE and other things that were being shipped across oceans worldwide. So yeah, there is. And then the stay-at-home product categories, consumer goods, DIY, outdoor living, all those ex-fitness, all those different categories were being stressed like they'd never been before. So now we've got ships, we've got sitting off of space outside of Long Beach, particularly. We have 80,000 containers that are just stuck right now.
I just want to add on, I agree exactly with what David's saying. It's really complicated, perfect storm of a lot of supply chain issues happening right now from the China side and the Southeast Asia side. A lot of manufacturers have moved out of China to Southeast Asia, to Vietnam, and to India. And during COVID, when those places closed, Vietnam closed for several months, then you had a stoppage of items going out. In China, they're also very, very sensitive to COVID, especially at the ports. If there's any outbreak, you're going to see a slowdown, which is what we saw in Shenzhen. That might continue to happen, but they're very focused on containing COVID. It's a very militant strategy. So you're going to see these continuous slowdowns. I don't think it's a political angle. I don't think it's something that China has decided to do. It's just a whole lot of things happen at the same time. On the positive side, we do see that supply chain is improving, that Chinese factories are moving things out quicker. We did have power shortages in China in the last couple of months, and China has realized that that's a problem, and they've rebalanced coal supplies and other issues. So from China's side, I don't really think there's any intention behind it. There's just a lot of different political and economic problems that occurred and made it a perfect storm for a lot of our companies in the US to get products from China.
Sorry about that. I was tying into the question that we were just discussing, and that has to do with the fast increasing costs of shipping. How do you as a business, or do you advise your clients to deal with unpredictable shipping charges in how they price here? How do they stay profitable? So I think Maryann's going to start off.
Well, what I did, because I was hearing of all the nightmare scenarios, I actually changed the amount of my first order, and the manufacturer completely understood. And I said, well, what's the difference if I bring it, you know, the time and the price, if we bring it by sea versus DHL. And DHL is what I've always used for my prototype samples that I've gotten. And so it was about a $400 difference. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to do that. And I'm going to pay $400 more to get it 3 months in advance. You know, for me, the time was worth it. So being able to, instead of you're having 1,000 units shipped, okay, only send me 100 or 200 right now. And I can afford it for DHL. Of course, it still normally takes 3 days. It's now going to take 10 days, but it's still a lot faster than 4 or 6 months. So it's all negotiable.
Thank you. I think this is a question for David, just more about your specific company, Baysource Supply, and how you work with your clients. Couple questions there. Are you managing the whole process of, you know, qualifying, identifying the manufacturer, getting the product out the door, and are you also handling the logistics from point A to point B? That's the first question. And then second question is fee structure for how your company makes money. Are you charging on a deal by deal basis, or is it more a consulting type deal?
Yeah, thanks for the question. While we do have a trading, we can act as a trader. Really, that only becomes relevant when our clients want to maybe conceal the actual manufacturer from their competitors. So we can act as the trading company. We we pivoted about 8 or 9 years ago. We do not monetize by marking up products. So we don't find the supplier, find the product and mark it up 10 or 20% or whatever. We are purely a consulting company. So we charge by the man day for the specific position in our company, whether it's sourcing or engineering or quality control or whatever. And so that's, we just bill monthly, and we call it open kimono, very transparent. All of our work is client directed. We have identified 30 suppliers. We recommend these 5. Would you like us to visit the top 3? And that's, you know, at the approval of the client. So that's a daily fee. That's how we operate. That's how, what our model is. It's kind of different from, say, a broker. Not that there's anything wrong with a broker, but that is just simply our model. Yeah, we don't make money off of the client's products.
I have 2 questions. First one for Maryann. So the so-called trade war between the countries, I think, is still on. Have you ever calculated the cost of tax when you imported your products from China, and how big that percentage is? And if Kim can help to answer, for some products like clothes, I think the tax probably occupies way less percentage in the total cost so of the products imported from China. So what would you suggest that people here who are interested in products like clothes or footwear, they probably can find better suppliers in other Asian countries. My second question is, I want to echo what Khalid has just said. The political risks seems are coming closer, especially when the mainland China is speeding up its military modernization and uniting Taiwan probably is on the horizon. So for companies like Maryann's who want a long-term relationship with mainland China, if when a war or military conflicts come up, most probably there will be economic sanctions imposed by the United States on China. So how do you foresee the risks posed on businesses in America? Thank you.
Boy, that's a lot. All I can say is that I'm doing business today. Nobody can foresee the future. I mean, especially what's going on with COVID. You know, I've built a relationship with this manufacturer for the past 2 years. And I explained to them what we need. They've been able to reply to us and deliver to us for what we need. So for me to say that, you know, this is going to happen or that can happen, we don't even know what's going to happen in 2 months. We could be in COVID all over again in 3 months. So I try not to worry about, you know, the sky is falling. I just want to focus on me bringing my product to market and doing the best that I can with what we have and with the time that we have.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say on the first question about percentages, you know, it's one of the challenges companies have. So as I said, I advise New Zealand companies. So one of the New Zealand companies came to me and said, we're looking to manufacture XYZ product. We're making it in China now. We'd like to make it in Mexico or the United States. That supply chain doesn't exist here anymore. There are companies that are manufacturing it for themselves, but there aren't OEMs in that product category. So, and people think that China did this on purpose. I hear all the time, you know, that China created all this supply chain to overtake the world. And in reality, when you look at the history of the development of manufacturing, China as a closed economy in the 70s and 80s, industrializing, they made everything for their own 1.4 billion person population. So they had a wash bucket factory and a bicycle factory and a automotive factory and a bandage factory and a crayon factory because they had to make it all themselves. So when American companies went looking for manufacturers, they actually found all of that already available in China. Maybe not the quality that they wanted or the materials that they wanted, but the infrastructure existed. When you look at Mexico, they weren't making their own crayons and they weren't making their own bandages. They don't have the same population. So the type of manufacturing that went into Mexico was foreign companies going down there and saying, and we want to make this. And typically that was more high-tech product and not consumable product. So, you know, there's an interplay in terms of what gets made where. Part of it is industrialization and development and history and what was endemic to that country. And so companies say, you know, we are looking at Vietnam, but then you may move your factory to Vietnam, but your supply chain is still in China. You know, and Vietnam struggles with a tremendous amount of infrastructure problems. So, you know, they've got a lot of infrastructure issues. There's still a lot of bribery, you know, there's their skill sets. So there's really high unemployment, and yet factories can't find workers because the Vietnamese government wanted high-tech factories, but the workers aren't skilled for high-tech jobs. So there's just a lot of things going on in all of this that it's not as simple as saying it's cheaper here, it's cheaper there. They don't have the capability, they don't have the equipment, they don't have the suppliers, they don't have the supply chain. You know, you can't just pick up and move, you know, so it's funny to me that people ask to do that or think that they can do that.
Thank you, Kim. We need to wrap everything up now. So I'll thank everyone who's online. You can continue the conversation with our speakers. I'll send around the contact information as well as copies of their presentations for you. For people who are here in person, you're welcome to stay afterwards and talk to each other, talk to Maryann and Kim. And for some of you who've made appointments to have some one-on-one time with Kim, we'll have that over in the executive boardroom. So thank you to our 5 wonderful speakers.
Bye.
And I have to especially recognize the 2 calling in from China, where I think it must be pushing midnight there by now. So
Yep,
thank you for
almost
a very
midnight.
late night
We're used
helping
to it.
Orlando businesses.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you guys. Bye.
Thank you.